Welcome back, everyone. Today we are going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be taking a look at a couple of our YouTube subscriber games. Now, as some of you may know, the other day I made a community post, and in it I asked for submissions from subscribers of the YouTube channel for games that I could review. Now, I intend to do this weekly. I'll try to go over 2 to 3 games. At the moment, I did my first submission through a community post. Going forward, I'll probably find a better method like Google Forms or something of that nature, so that all the comments aren't out there in a public kind of way, because obviously people, when they play games, sometimes they don't want that info being publicly available. So I'll try to find a better way going forward. But at any rate, we are going to start off looking at 2 sub games for this week. So big shout out to the subscribers of our YouTube channel. If you have not subscribed already, make sure to subscribe. All right, let's jump right into it. Now, the first game that we are going to be looking at is a game that is played between Dusty Waffles 212 and NoName. Now, I do know that the ratings of the 2 players were 1547 and 1546, so the players are pretty evenly matched. Now, there is one thing I want to mention before we go into the game. You will notice how I put NoName, because obviously I got no information. Now, the famous world chess champion Garry Kasparov, when he had his own database, tons and tons of analysis accumulated over decades of work with many great Russian trainers, one of the funny things about the analysis in his database was that he would have some games, he would allude to them, and he would put the names of the players. But when I had a GM, he would put a name like, let's just say Kasimzhanov or Karpov or Anand or whatever. But if it was someone who was a little bit lower rated, let's just say an IM or a master level player, he would put, say, Karpov dash and N. And NN obviously referred to NoName. So if you're not a grandmaster, Garry Kasparov did not care about you at all. Now, here on our channel, we do care about you guys, which is why we're looking at your games. And we do hope that you learned something from this. So the first game we have is Dusty Waffles versus NoName. The game starts out with e4. We get c6 being played here, d4, d5. And now Dusty Waffles plays this move f3. Now, this is what is called a fantasy variation against the Caro-Kann defense. White basically tries to protect his center here. Other variations like knight c3 are playable, or knight d2, but in all cases, black can trade. And we end up with a position where basically here white has the 1 pawn in the center. So when white plays this move f3, the idea is that if black takes, you want to capture and keep both these pawns in the center, controlling all these critical squares. So after f3, f5 is played. Now, if you're not familiar with this line, because a lot of players at lower levels don't play it, it can come as a big surprise. What black should play here, in fact, is black should trade the pawns on e4 and go e5. Now, a reason you could get confused here is that, as I said before, a lot of the main lines feature moves like knight c3, knight d2. Now, against both these moves, your development is very obvious. You bring the bishop out, play e6, develop your bishops and your knights. It doesn't change based on the knight moves. Additionally, white can play a move like pawn takes and say bishop d3, but once again, you bring the knights out, you can bring the bishop out, or just develop your other bishop with e6 and bishop d6. The plans don't change. So if you are unfamiliar with this f3 move, you should probably check it and be aware that it does exist, because if you don't know what you're doing, like the player with black in this case doesn't, he goes f5, which is a very bad move. Now, of course, black is trying to attack the center. What black should do, as I was mentioning, is black should trade and play this move e5. The reason for doing this is that white cannot play c3 to keep these 2 pawns in the center, because if you play a move like c3, black can now go queen h4 check, and the king is in check, and the pawn on e4 is under attack. If you play g3, I take on e4 check, and then you lose the rook on h1, and you're pretty much already lost on move number 7. So white can't really go c3 here. If white were to take on e5, same thing with queen h4. So white normally will play knight f3. It stops the queen check on h4, but it also guards the pawn on d4 with both the knight and the queen. Now, here there are many ways for black to play. What I would probably recommend here at the lower levels is to play this move bishop g4. And now if white plays this move bishop to c4, for example, threatening bishop takes f7, you go knight d7. If you play knight f6 here, white can take on f7 with check. King takes bishop, and now there's knight takes pawn. King is in check, and you lose the bishop here. And in these positions, one cool line is this line with queen takes d4, where white actually gets a checkmate on move number 11. So bishop g4 is the first move that I would recommend. Now, if white were to take the pawn on e5 here, you can trade the queens and then go knight to d7. You're threatening to win the pawn on e5 here, because if I play knight c3, you take the pawn. I cannot capture the knight because then my king is in check. And if white plays a move like bishop f4 to guard the pawn, now you can play knight to e7. Let's just say white plays knight c3, you go knight g6, attacking the bishop. Bishop moves, and then you take the pawn once again, because just like in the previous variation, the knight on f3 would be pinned. So I would probably recommend that you play bishop g4, and after bishop c4 that you play this move knight to d7 here, preventing this trick with bishop takes and knight e5. If white tries to go takes and knight g5, for example, checking the king, you can take with the queen. Queen is guarding the bishop. White captures your queen, you capture the white queen, and after king takes bishop, you'll notice that black has 1 2 3 minor pieces and white has a knight and a bishop, so white is behind by a piece. So I'd probably recommend that you do play knight d7. Now white will probably play something like castles here, and now you go knight f6, and the idea is very simple. After white plays a move like c3 to guard his center, you just play bishop d6 with the idea of castling next move. And once you get castled, then you reach the middle game. There are a lot of plans I could go into. I'm not really going to do that at the moment, but this is probably what I recommend if you're playing the Hikaru Khan and you're dealing with the fantasy variation. At any rate, f5 is played here. Black tries to contest the center, and it's a very logical move in a way if you're unfamiliar with the variation, because you're hoping that white will take the pawn, and now you get your bishop out, and then you play e6, bishop d6, develop the knight, castle the king, like in all those other variations of the Hikaru Khan. So f5 is played here. White goes bishop to d3. Now bishop d3 is not the best move. What I'd probably recommend if I was playing with white here in this situation is I'd probably recommend playing pawn takes pawn, and after pawn takes a move like bishop to b5 here, and after knight to c6, just developing your knight, getting your king out of the center. Let's just say black plays e6, castles, knight f6. Now you can go knight to f4, and after bishop to d6, you can play a move like rook to e1, putting pressure on the pawn on e6. Now as you guys will notice, the evaluation bar and the computer is not completely in sync with what I'm saying, but at certain levels, basic themes and basic ideas are more important than being absolutely precise. So if you see this basic theme here with this what we call backwards pawn on e6, which is behind these two other pawns next to it, which have been pushed forward, this is a permanent weakness. So I probably recommend that. At any rate, Dusty Waffles goes bishop to d3. We get pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, bishop takes pawn, and knight to f6. Now all these moves make a lot of sense. Both players are trying to develop. Now one reason that I am kind of hesitant to sometimes mention specific opening lines is because f3 is a completely reasonable line at the top level, but if you're newer to the game and you don't really understand what you're doing, it's very easy here to end up in this situation where what you're trying to guard the pawn, but after knight to f6, black gets his knight out, he's going to get the bishop out, and your pieces aren't really perfectly placed. So we get bishop to f3, bishop f5, of course following the basic Hikaru Khan themes to play e6 and develop the bishop. We get knight to e2, e6, castles, bishop to e7, bishop to f4, castles, and now we get c3. Now all these moves I like. They might not be the absolute best moves from either side, but they're following the basic themes. They're trying to get back into that territory where they feel comfortable. We get c3, and now c5 is played. Now this is a huge mistake because for a couple of reasons. First of all, it hangs this pawn on b7, and you will lose the rook in the corner. Secondly though, if you use your brain, you think about the basics here. What are the basics? They're very simple developing plans. Now the Hikaru Khan almost never, I honestly want to say I can't think of almost any variation other than something like the advanced variation where you go c5 and knight c6. There almost are no variations where you ever develop this knight to c6. Probably like 95% of the lines you get something where you put the knight on d7. So based on the general themes of the piece placement that you're going to learn from the opening phase of the game, the c5 move is very illogical, aside from the fact that it just blunders, but because you almost always just put this knight on d7, which is exactly what black should have done. You put the knight on d7 here, and then if I'm black, I'm probably looking to bring the queen out and then maybe play c5 down the road. To illustrate a variation, let's just say I go, I don't know, h3, queen to b6, queen c1. Now you can play c5. You can also play e5 here. Generally you're looking for both these pawn breaks, but you have to bring the knight out first before you look to play either c5 or e5, because the knight on d7 supports both of these pawn pushes. So after c3 we get c5. Now we get pawn takes pawn. White misses the free pawn on b7. Bishop takes pawn check, king to h1. We get knight to c6, knight to d2. Good development from white here. If you look at the position, white has castled the king. Bishops are well placed. They're on these two diagonals. Knight is developed. What is not developed? The knight and the rook. Now you could go knight a3, but black can always take, and you get these kind of misplaced pawns on a3, a2, and c3. So knight d2 is a great move. We get e5, bishop takes c6, b takes c6, and now bishop takes e5. Now again, without getting too deep into the weeds here, because these players are 1500s, there are a lot of captures, a lot of pieces which are under attack here, so you don't expect perfect play. Probably what the best move is for white in this position, just as a general concept, is you look at the pawn structure, and after e5 you can play bishop g5 here. Now the first thing is your bishop is really good on this diagonal. The knight is pinned, so if black pushes his pawn here, you can simply go check, king to h8, and then you can take the pawn, takes, and if knight takes knight, you will lose your queen. So when you look at this position here, just from general standpoint, I'm just going to play a random move like king h8, knight g3, and bishop e6. Once you get this knight to e4, you'll notice that white has a 3-on-2 majority on the queen side. Your bishops are very well placed, but more importantly, black has this isolated pawn on e5, which is also blockaded by a knight on e4, and it's a weakness. Now at a 1500 level, I don't expect anybody to exploit that, maybe not even at a master level necessarily, but it is the one big weakness that black has in the position. Because if you look overall, are there weaknesses? Pawns are they're fine. The knight is in the way, so you don't really have attacks on the diagonal. King side is pretty stable here. You do have the 3-on-2, but it's not like you can really push your pawns right away. So this is the one weakness. So bishop takes c6 was played. We got pawn takes bishop, bishop takes pawn. Black should have taken this bishop, by the way, because after bishop takes pawn, there is rook b8, and if you move the bishop, you will lose the pawn on b2. So pawn takes bishop is played, bishop e5. We get bishop to e3 here, and now we get knight d4, which is fine. I mean, a little bit of tunnel vision. You could also capture the bishop, but knight d4 is not a bad move either, because you see that the knight on d2 is under attack from the bishop and the queen. So we get knight to d4, g6 is played here, and now we get queen b3 check, king h8, knight to c4, which is pretty good. You'll notice here that even though black has the two bishops, because he's played g6 and had to move the king to the dark squares, this bishop on e5 is really strong. So we get knight c4, bishop takes knight, bishop takes bishop, rook to b8, and now we get this move queen d1. Now one thing that's worth noting as well is that in this position the sides have opposite colored bishops. Black has a light square bishop, white has a dark square bishop. Now when it's opposite colored bishops, as we know in bishop and pawn endgame specifically, since it's the most it's the endgame that's beaten over the head the most, those tend to be very drawish. But when you're playing in positions where you have queens and rooks on the board and the bishops are opposite colors, generally if one side's king is weaker than the others, it's very hard to play against, because you can never really trade off the bishop. Like you can't trade these two bishops because they're not on the same color, and it's very hard to get rid of it. So if someone has if you have opposite color bishops and your king or your opponent's king is under attack, it's very difficult to defend. So we get a6 being played here. Now this just stops white from taking a pawn. Not that that was necessarily white's biggest threat. We get knight to e5, good move. Rook c8, which also guards the pawn on c6. Queen d2, c5, very good move, by the way, from NoName here. In this position, if you're playing with white, there are a couple of ways to win the game, but probably what I would recommend as the simplest way, again, this is not the top computer line, but just keeping basic themes in play here, is this bishop is really good. Now c5 will remove the bishop, so what I would recommend is that you play this move b4 to stop c5, because now the bishop is firmly planted on d4 and black can never really remove it without, say, sacrificing a rook for the bishop. So that's probably what I would recommend. There are other ways to win on the spot with moves like knight g4, but at a 1500 level, some of the basic themes are much more important than precise play. So in this position we get queen d2 and now c5, excellent move, because after bishop e3 black could have traded the queens. Now generally when you're looking at this position, or any position for that matter, you're thinking about what are your weaknesses. If you look at this position, black's king is a little bit weaker. There's some dark square weaknesses, and certainly one move ago they were much more pronounced. You're also down a pawn here, so your king is weak, you're down a pawn. When that happens with all these weaknesses, it's much better to trade the queens, also because as we think about now, with queens off the board with opposite colored bishops, that gives you much better chances to draw the game. For example, say you can go knight g4 and trade, there are pretty decent chances to draw this game, and in a top level GM game there's a good chance that this would be a draw, and in a computer game 100% it would be a draw. So after bishop e3, queen e8 is played instead. We get knight to c4 here, threatening to go knight d6, forking the queen and the rook. It also guards the bishop. Nice move. Rook d8, knight d6 is played here, and now we get queen to e7, which allows bishop takes pawn. Another excellent move here. You have to be careful. You could take the bishop on f5, but bishop takes c5 just wins another pawn. You guard the knight twice and you're in very good shape. Now we get knight to e4 being played here. Queen d4 is played, excellent move. Knight e4 maybe was okay too, but queen d4 is a great move. You check the king, and now the queen is guarded by the bishop and the pawn. We get king g8, knight takes f5, excellent move here, because now if black captures the knight, you win the queen. If black takes with the queen on c5, you actually have knight to h6, which is a beautiful checkmate here. King simply has no squares. So we get knight f5, rook d4, knight takes queen check, king h8, bishop takes d4, excellent, knight f6, and now we get bishop takes f6. Rook takes f6 would actually be a little bit more beautiful, because after rook takes, bishop takes, it's checkmate. But you know what, it's not about style points, it's about winning the game at this level. And we get bishop takes f6, takes, king g7, rook a6, king f7, and knight to d5, and white wins the game. Now this is Dusty Waffles 2 and 12, a subscriber of our YouTube channel. very, very good game overall. My only critique would be that playing the fantasy variation, I'm not quite sure where Dusty Waffles picked it up, but I would recommend something a little bit more standard, because as we saw in this game from both sides, as soon as both sides were confused and did something unusual, they didn't know how to follow up, because they're looking at all these very standard lines with this very straightforward development. And that's why I actually generally don't advocate for playing these lines at the lower level. Now for me, I will tell you what I did very briefly before we move on to the next game. What I played up until I was about master level or a little bit better was I took and I played bishop d3, c3, and bishop f4. You get similar structures to the London opening at times, but it's very basic. If black plays like knight f6, you go c3. If he ever goes bishop g4, you go queen b3, attacking the pawn. If he plays knight c6, you go bishop f4 to stop e5. Again, bishop g4, you go queen b3, knight d2, knight f3, and castles. If black plays e6, same thing. You go like knight f3, bishop d6, trade, castles, rook to e1, with the idea of playing knight to e5. Say black was rook b8, knight e5. If takes, you take and you win material. And if black plays something like a6, you can get f4, knight to 2, rook e3, rook h3, and then it becomes a lot like a London system. So at any rate, there are many different ways to play, but and I'm not even saying you should play this against Hikaru Khan, but you should play something where it's very straightforward until you're probably maybe, I would say, expert level, like 2000 rating ish, because when you play a move like f3, there's nothing wrong with it. If your opponent plays a move that you're unaware of, like f5 here, immediately white blunders, because you're sort of programmed where you're only looking at the lines that you've seen that have been mentioned in videos and so forth, as opposed to understanding a very basic plan. So it is really important, I would say, that you look for something a little bit simpler, because I do feel like if you play f3 against someone who's like 1900, maybe 200-300 points higher rated, there's a good chance that they're going to probably beat you out of the opening when you push the pawn this early, because if you don't know exactly what you're doing, you are in essence creating a potential long-term weakness. So good first game. This is a game from Dusty Waffles versus NoName. Now we're going to move on to our second game. This is a game that was played by Happy6, another YouTube subscriber, against Lud Legend. Now Happy6 rated 1666, Lud Legend rated 1658. I guess this guy is a fan of Ludwig. So the game starts with d4. We get d4, we get b6, now we get e4. So this is what we call the Owens defense, where black plays b6 and fianchettos the bishop to b7. So we get g6 here. So I guess black is going for the double fianchetto with bishop b7 and g7, d6, d5, bishop b7, knight to c3, bishop g7. Now we get knight to f3, and here black plays an interesting move, bishop takes knight on c3. Now what I'm going to say in the next like minute or so, this is very advanced, so certainly don't take this as general advice, but one thing that's really important to understand is pawn structures. Now the reason I say that is because here you're looking at this and you're like, well, white has the double pawns, and everyone's like, oh yeah, we've seen Hikaru play the b feeder a million times with bishop g7, knight c3, c5, d5, takes. And what's the difference? You look at this pawn structure, it's very, very similar. If we look at this position, very similar. White has these three pawns. Black hasn't even pushed c5 yet, but white has these double pawns on c4, c3, and the pawn on d5. Now pawn structures are very important, because when we look at it from the b feeder, black's next move here is to play f5, very specifically to stop white from getting a big center here with pawns on e4, d5, and c4. So now when we go back to this position here, this is actually much worse, because white has already achieved the big center with the three pawns out, and black cannot prevent it. So black plays e5, which is a good move, and here white plays bishop d3. Now it's hard to explain without making it sound very advanced, but this game and this whole opening strategy and the pawn structure revolves around deep concepts. Now black has given up this dark square bishop, so when he plays e5, he's trying to close down his whole king side. Let's say you go bishop d3. I'm just going to play a move like f6 here. Black is going to go like queen e7 and castles queenside. You'll notice that if white ever tries to attack here, it's very hard, because you don't have a pawn here. The structure is very, very solid. You can't really push c5 either, so black is completely safe, and he's going to castle the queenside. Now what you will also notice is that you have this dark square bishop, which black does not have, but the bishop can't really target anything. You look at this diagonal, all the pawns are guarded, you don't have anything either way, so even though you have a wooden shield, it's not really doing a whole lot. So when black plays e5, what you're generally trying to look to do here is open up diagonals, open up the position as much as you can. So what white should have done here is white should have traded the pawns here and then played something like bishop to g5, because after black plays a move like knight to f6, there's actually e5, which wins the game on the spot. The knight is pinned, you can't move without losing the queen. If you take on not e4, if you take on f3, I can just take with the pawn, and after pawn takes pawn, we trade the queens, I take the knight, and I win the game. So you're looking to open up diagonals here, and after black plays a move like, let's just say queen d7 for example, now you can go queen d4 and the rook is under attack on h8. Black doesn't really have any way to stop you from capturing it without playing e5, but after e5 now you can take the pawn on e5. Let's just say black goes queen to e6 here, and now you can even play a simple move like knight to f3, queen takes e4, and this excellent move bishop to e3, blocking the check. Once again, what can black do to save this rook in the corner? You can't go queen e5 because then you lose your queen. If you move the knight, I just take the knight, and if you trade the queens, now I take with a dark square bishop. And just like that, I have exploited the fact that black gave up his dark square bishop so early in the game, and once again you're going to win at least a knight or a rook here. So in these beefeater sort of structures, there's probably actually a technical name that I'm unaware of, where white gets these double pawns on c4 and c3. If black tries to fianchetto the bishop and take on c3 in the beefeater where black gets to play f5 before white plays the e4, it's a little bit different. But if you get a situation like this, or even frankly, let's just say you get some position, not bishop b2, sorry, bishop d3, something even like this. Generally what black's trying to do is he's trying to close the position as much as he can, so you're always looking to open it up as much as you can. So after e5, white should have taken this pawn and played en passant. Instead, bishop to d3 is played, knight d7, castles, h6 is played here to stop bishop g5. We get bishop e3. Now one fun fact that I'm going to tell you guys is there's no way of me verifying this, but I feel like I probably had a position very similar to this against Gata Kamsky, the famous legend, way back in the old days when I played him on the internet chess club. I'll tell you exactly the game that I think I had. We had it was some position where he played a hippopotamus. It was something like probably like this, and at some point I played a move like d5, and he played a move like bishop c3 takes and e5 here. Now you'll notice this is different because now there's no en passant possibility. So I think I had something extremely similar to this game against Gata many moons ago when we played on the internet chess club. So we get knight gf6, h3 to stop knight g4, logical move, queen to e7, a4. Good idea to play for a5 because now that black has played h6, you know that he's not castling kingside because that would just hang the pawn on h6. So it's sort of a tell where you know he's not castling kingside, so he's going to be castling to the queen side. So a5 is played, get queen to c1, g5 is played, knight d2, black castles here, and white has some problems here. White cannot really attack on the queen side. You can maybe go knight b3 here, but any idea with like queen b2 and rook b1 is going to be very slow here, and you're actually getting attacked very quickly on the g file. So it's probably too slow to play something like knight b3. I mean, the plan would be to do something like this, for example, where you can then take on a5 with the double stack or the triple stack. But as I said, it's probably a little bit too slow because black is going to attack immediately on the king side. So we get g3 being played here. Now we get rook d g8. Happy plays knight to b3. Queen to f8 is played, which I don't really understand queen f8. I mean, if you're trying to attack here, just thinking about it, you either have to go h5 g4 or you need to push the f pawn. You can't really play h5 because you hang the g5 pawn. If you go g4, white will play h4, and now the king side is completely closed, so you can't really push the pawns. Queen f8 doesn't do a whole, I mean, I guess queen f8, the idea might be that you want to play g4, but again, the whole point behind after g4 is even if you guard the pawn, I'm still closing the king side no matter what. So probably here for black, the ideas that I can think of right off are knight h5 and knight to f4. Maybe you can go knight c5. You could also maybe try to go king b8 and bishop c8, although it feels a little bit slow. Actually, maybe if I was playing here, I might consider a move like king to d8 with the idea that after queen b2 you could go bishop c8 and then move the knight and take the pawn on h3, but probably it's a little bit too slow. So queen f8 is played here. We get queen to b2. Now we get knight to e8, and now we get rook f to b1. Excellent move here, and white's actually played this very well because he's gotten the setup that he wants, and black's attack has completely stalled out on the king side here. There are no pawn breaks, the king is very safe. So g3, as I think about it now, g3 is an excellent move. I mean, it's not objectively a great move, I mean, all things considered, but considering the skill level and sort of understand, I mean, probably not truly understanding the reasoning as a 1600, but nonetheless, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and assume that he understood what black was trying to do here. It is a phenomenally strong move to play. So we get rook b1, knight g7, c5 is played here. Now knight takes a5 is good, but I actually like c5 a little bit more here because now you open up the diagonal for this light square bishop, which is behind this pawn wall and not really doing a whole lot. So we get c5, d takes c5, bishop b5 is played. Not the best move, but should be good enough. Queen to d6 is played, bishop takes knight, queen takes, knight takes c5. Excellent move. Black cannot capture because then you lose the bishop. So we get queen to d6. Actually, to illustrate the line, after takes, check, king d8, there's queen a8 check. If queen c8, you have rook b8 winning the queen, and if king e7, I assume you go check, king f6, and now queen a6 should be winning. King has no squares really. You have to play something like c6 here, but after rook to b7, the whole house is falling apart and white should win very shortly. So we get queen d6, takes c4. Excellent move here, trying to go c5 and rip open the protection in front of the black king. Excellent play. We get f5, c5, perfect. Queen f6, c6, king c8, bishop takes b6. Wow. We get f takes e4, bishop takes c7. Great move. Now bishop c5 actually is instamate because you're threatening queen b8 right away, and if black moves the king, you go checkmate. Bishop covers the escape square, pawn on c6 covers the square on d7. So slightly better, but again, like the first game, there's the style points don't matter whatsoever. It's just important that you get the win no matter how you do it. So bishop takes, king takes, we get queen b7, king d6, check, king c5, rook c1, king d4, queen a7, king takes d5, check, queen d6, rook d1, king c5 takes, and Ludwig legend resigns here. So what can we say about this game? I actually would say it's a really good game. Now I assume that happy 6 g3 was not some deep concept that he came up with. He probably just played it because he thought it made some sense for whatever reason, but overall I would say that it's a really well played game by white here. G3 is a really good move. I honestly, I'm a little bit speechless. I don't really know what to say about it because it's just that good. Because when black goes h5, I mean, this is just a general thing to illustrate. Obviously, in a specific position, pawns are weak. But normally, when one side is attacking and you have one side pushing the pawns, as long as you can always close the king side here, or queen side for that matter, say g4 h4 or h4 g4, whenever you have these two pawns like this where you can play the opposing push based on whichever pawn is pushed, it's really important because generally that is what can stop one side from being able to attack. So this is a really good game. G3 was a phenomenal move. I'm speechless. I don't know what to say. It's just that good. So great game. Great games from Dusty Waffles 212. Great game from Happy 6, both subscribers to my YouTube channel. Now, as I said, you guys, I intend to start doing this weekly, like 2 to 3 games just once a week from you guys as subs, and give you some comments, general critiques. Now, the 2 games this week are very good. I actually don't have a lot that I can critique from this game specifically, so I hope you guys have enjoyed this analysis I've done of some sub games. We will do this every week. If you've not hit that subscribe button, make sure to hit it below, and we'll have more great content coming to you very soon here on YouTube. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this, and see everybody very soon. Bye.